Hello everyone and welcome to yet another day in this the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a member. Anyway, today once again we are covering the illegal migrant hotel protests, which as a core principle I am obviously very much on the side of the protesters. However, there are a few quite clear blunders that are making themselves quite clear these days, which do need to be called out, because ultimately, what's the way that protests on the left work? Effectively, never be violent. As far as you go is a little bit of graffiti, very minor property damage, and blocking roads. I support absolutely none of that. I think just going outside the hotels of the pink ladies and having a bit of a party is a good way to get your protest forward, and was the main reason for the win in Epping. That's not really happening these days. However, before we get on to that, I do want to say, in Epping, they still seem to be very much on that side of things, but the police are quite clearly coming back.
They're trying to push people. More police are coming up here, so I can't capture everything. But it looks like the police are trying to cause a scene. Look at that! Look what they're doing! Look what the police are doing! What are they doing?
So this is a woman called Cero, and I am having trouble finding her last name, but still. Quite clearly part of the pink ladies and quite clearly being arrested in what I would call a bit of a overstep from the police. However, I can sort of understand it insofar as the police need to cordon everyone off into a specific place. That is what they were doing, and she obviously got through and waved a Union Jack at the Civic Centre, which was not part of the approved protest area. But this is civil disobedience. This is part of the playbook that the left have legitimised. So, my sympathy for the police doing their job only goes so far. And obviously people at the protest were not particularly happy with this.
Round this side! Whoa! They're causing a scene!
Yeah, so I've said a few times when covering these protests, the way it typically works is you effectively get permission from the police to have an area to protest in, and you should stay in there as part of the protest, because ultimately the police are there to control the situation. Anyone who goes out of that control, as you can see, gets arrested. Are they overhanding it by having 4 officers arrest her? Yeah, but they also need to, well, show the state monopoly on force, and frankly, I think the best thing for the police to do would have just been arrest her, put her elsewhere, Public Order Act, no charge, release, she can go back, and if she behaves, that's fine. I don't think they've done that though, as we'll go through. For now, there were 2 more arrests there. One of them thankfully was caught on video.
What are you doing, man?
One of the leaders of the protest.
A bit of room here, would you? Charges, what charges?
Were you under arrest for
Inciting
Callum?
racial hatred.
Excuse me?
Inciting racial hatred. You don't understand him in my home.
Callum is now under arrest for inciting racial hatred.
I mean, yes, don't get me wrong, Callum has been part of parties that I do not like because of their, well, at the very least, tolerance to racism. It's overt in a lot of other ways, but realistically that's not a reason to arrest him and never should be. I would love to know what their evidence is, because the only thing I have seen that Callum had at this particular protest was a sign saying clear them out, which I think you have to reach a little bit to say that's inciting racial hatred. Jonathan Bowden, who I'm not actually that big a fan of, but Jonathan Bowden wouldn't particularly like that, because all he was actually saying in that speech was win elections, but nobody seems to get that. So until I see more evidence, I'm going to have to go ahead and assume that they are effectively just going after organisers here, because that Sarah woman's actually, I believe, got a position in the local reform branch, and I believe would even put herself forward as a candidate. And now don't get me wrong, she was going to a place that was not permitted for the protest. So I know a lot of people are going to say, what do you mean you need a place that's permitted by the protest? Like, that's just how protests work here, and she might get away with it. Bear in mind how much Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil got away with. You never know here. Just an arrest, to me, is not a reason to go absolutely crazy. Wait and see, and if this goes to court, I would say it's gone too far. A simple arrest is not actually as crazy as people think when it comes to British policing. An awful lot of the time, an arrest happens at protests effectively to remove troublemakers. Now, was she a troublemaker? Insofar as she would encourage other people to break the police barrier, and guess who can't have that? The police. As for Callum's arrest, I see absolutely no reason for his arrest whatsoever. That I have absolutely no defence to the police for, and I hope Callum does not get charged with inciting racial hatred, because even though I would suspect he would have opinions on that side of the fence, I don't think he should be arrested for it, and from what I can see, he didn't actually push any racial hatred in the vicinity. Details from BBC News are as follows. 3 people were arrested, with one man being Callum. Arrest on suspicion of inciting racial hatred. I'm yet to see any evidence for that. Another man and a woman were arrested for breaching orders in place for the protest. Obviously one of them was Cero, and the other one was a man who decided to stay in the area after the dispersal order at 8 o'clock. Again, these are all very common policing tactics when it comes to these protests. It's really nothing else the ordinary. But obviously you see Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop All getting away with a lot more, so don't get me wrong, this is still two-tier policing, but they are tactics that I don't actually have a problem in principle with. 200 people gathered outside Epping Forest District Council building, where a woman climbed the steps and unfurled the Union Jack before being detained by officers after refusing to leave. That might also be the other reason she was arrested, because she refused to leave. A spokesperson for Essex Police said her arrest was categorically not for flying the Union flag, but because the Civic Centre was not an area where protesters were allowed. Because ultimately, yeah, they have to control the protest because they can get out of hand. One man was arrested when he refused to leave the area after the protest had concluded, breaching Section 14 order. The man who was arrested on suspicion of inciting racial hatred was detained after an emblem was reported to have been set alight during a protest on Friday, police say. Oh. What was set on fire? Because I cannot find anything about that. If it was a cross, I can understand the KKK thing, but I have no idea what was set alight there, because I have not seen or even heard of anything being set alight at that protest. Though it was a protest on Friday, so it was not the protest from yesterday, which we're talking about here. But still, that is something that you would expect to see on Twitter, because everything gets passed around Twitter, and certainly ends up on my timeline, but there we go. Anyway, this is by far the least worst story of the weekend. In fact, it's the only one I really don't have a problem with the protesters with. But we got the news that the Met Police arrested 5 people after a group of masked men attempted to enter a hotel in West London housing asylum seekers on Saturday. The men tried to get into Crown Plaza in Stockley Road in West Drayton through a rear entrance and damaged security fences, according to the police. The force said on the Sunday that there had been no charges so far, and 4 of the 5 arrested had been released on bail, with 1 remaining in custody. 2 anti-asylum groups comprising of about 500 people marched on the Crown Plaza about 12... Oh wow, that was midnight. Fresh protests against the hotel housing asylum seekers, as well as counter-demonstrations also took place in parts of England and Scotland on Saturday. So yes, there is a bit of a rise in problems here, and it's largely down to the Epping decision last week, where the Supreme Court decided that actually no asylum seekers have to be housed in hotels because their rights trump yours. People are not going to be particularly happy with that, are they? And there were plenty of other protests going on. In Falkirk, Scotland, pro- and anti-immigration protesters, numbering several hundred on each side, gathered outside a hotel housing asylum seekers. They also took place in Warrington, Skegness, Barnwood and Portsmouth. And obviously it came after, as I said before, the appeal that happened over for the Epping Hotel, and 2 men were charged following a protest in the town some hours after the ruling. That was in Epping. My advice, as always, is if you're going to a protest, that's perfectly fine, I have nothing wrong with that. If you start seeing people masked up, I would start to avoid it, though. Bad things can only come out of that, and you only put yourself in danger of getting charged by the police. As the news has gone through here, in all these towns, reasonable, peaceful protests, from what I can gather. The one that happened in West Drayton, not so much, partially because there are a whole bunch of masked men there, and guess what? They're going to get aggressive. They pretty much always do. And you're putting yourself in danger of being charged and having a criminal record simply by being there. Unless you have the defence of being an impartial observer, say you're a citizen's journalist, as we will go through as well, then maybe you'll get away with it. But honestly, if you're just a normie, don't even bother. You did your bit by turning up when it was peaceful. You can do your bit by leaving when it gets not so peaceful. Again, follow this advice. Anyway, over at Canary Wharf, events were happening, and you'll notice why I have criticisms of masked men. Yes, the Pink Ladies protest over in Canary Wharf, where obviously probably the second highest profile case of asylum hotels made it to the mainstream, decided to move from the area to the nearby shopping centre, screaming out national anthems and patriotic songs, which I would largely have no issue with. But the problem is that they're completely aimless, just going through an entire shopping centre completely masked up, with the police having to escort them to make sure they basically don't get out of hand. And what happens? It gets out of hand. Yeah, it just comes to a head, and the masked men, what do? They start getting violent, and some of them get themselves arrested, which was inevitable. And the problem I have with this, obviously, is that it's free ammunition to the enemy, to the media. Look at all these masked men and even teenagers. There's a kid who was 11 here who gets pepper sprayed, by the way. And obviously, because it's a bit of an AoE attack, area of effect, obviously the journalists get hit with it too.
I was got pepper sprayed. These officers here just randomly attacked an individual protesting.
Nah, sorry man, this is on film. It was kicking off. I hate to say it, but I'm on the side of the police here. Do not join in with protests with masked men. My advice to the Pink Ladies, who have been doing very well so far, is have a rule. Do not mask up. Tommy Robinson even has this rule whenever he has demonstrations, and it's because he knows that the media will use it against him, because things will inevitably kick off.
And look, this was a demonstration to cause maximum disturbance, and it has achieved that. But the police response of being violent is just here to antagonise us.
Sorry, but they were getting away with an awful lot there. They were marching through a shopping centre, obviously nearby the hotel, and as he said, we came here to cause maximum disruption. Yeah, that's why things kicked off, because the masked men, given they're masked up, wanted to push boundaries, and the police said, no, that is the boundary. Don't try to say that the police are trying to antagonise you here. That isn't happening in Canary Wharf at that particular point. That was probably happening over in Epping. You could say it there. Can't say it here, though. Not having that. Anyway, Jack Hadfield, who's been doing a good job of keeping an eye on all this, has also been pepper sprayed at this particular event.
I just got pepper sprayed. It's on my glasses. Thank God. But I've been pepper sprayed now on my glasses here at Canary Wharf. Young Bob here. You got pepper sprayed as well. You got it in my face. On my glasses.
I don't particularly know what you'd expect when you're around a bunch of masked men and they start kicking off. Why would you not expect this? I mean, one thing I really hate are the people in masks dressed up in pink. No, the Pink Lady should absolutely ban that. You should not be allowed at these protests with a balaclava, because inevitably these things happen. And it ruins the reputation built up by the Epping women, who were effectively saying, we are our own thing, we are worried mothers, children and some fathers, we want these hotels closed down. Now it looks like you're bringing the thugs along with you, and that can easily paint you as violent agitators, and you really don't want that. Because headlines like this are now associated with the Pink Ladies. Police officer punched in Canary Wharf Asylum Hotel protest. 4 arrests after protest near the Britannia Hotel in East London, which is housing asylum seekers. With a picture like this. Sorry, this is going to make an awful lot of people go on the side of the police. There is a reason that Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil were incredibly effective, and there is a reason that Palestine Action has been very ineffective. I hate to say it, but Roger Hallam's right. You have to be civilly disobedient and not be particularly violent, at least in this day and age. So a police officer was punched in the face as protests outside the hotels housing asylum seekers continued on Sunday, the Met Police said. The Met said that there were 4 arrests after protests near the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf, East London, which is housing asylum seekers. Alleged offences included assault, possession of drugs, public order offences, failure to disperse. Tensions continued in the area throughout the day as a group of 20 to 50 anti-migrant demonstrators clashed with about 100 counter-protesters. The Met said one of our officers was punched in the face. Luckily, they did not suffer significant injury. The unrest followed as a renewed wave of protests after the Court of Appeal lifted a temporary injunction on the Bell Hotel. We've gone through that. The hotel became a flagship for tension after an asylum seeker housed there was charged with sexual assault in July. Chants of "our kids, our streets and send them back" were heard outside the 4-star hotel, Britannia Hotel, and a child was found carrying Parva irritant spray after discharging it. which, don't get me wrong, this is very ridiculous, but that is illegal in this country. But ultimately, as I've said, if you see masked men, stories like this will inevitably follow all the time. So unless you're really, really willing to risk going to jail and being done up for serious crime, I just avoid it entirely. Don't forget last year, the reaction to the riots were very popular and still are very popular. Even Lucy Connolly is a bit of a niche subject that, don't get me wrong, she should never have been in jail. But your average normie is very, very, very on the side of law and order and pretty much instinctively follow the police, even after Black Lives Matter and all that. So the best thing to do is to respect them, carry on with the protests as you have been doing, and just don't give them a reason to arrest you. Because ultimately it's only really a niche section of society that's on your side, and the whole point of the Pink Ladies was to avoid stories like this. Well, I'm afraid to say they didn't do very well over this particular weekend in Canary Wharf, but they've done exceptionally well as every other protest, so carry on with that. You will win. Anyway, I think that covers my advice for this weekend. Epping, as far as I can tell, you really didn't do anything wrong. In Canary Wharf, do not let masked men join your protest. It's only going to end in tears. Everywhere else there wasn't much detail on, so I can only assume that those protests went quite well. And to be honest, a lot of this is very much recoverable. The organisers just need to get a handle on no masked men. Ever. They only result in delegitimising your movement, and you end up getting smeared with it. Because let's be fair, there were pink ladies there too. Plenty of men in pink shirts, in masks. Sorry, but they represent the movement and you need to gatekeep them. They are not helpful, they are not going to get you anywhere. Carry on with what you were doing before because it was working, as is happening absolutely everywhere in Britain. Canary Wharf is a hiccup that is absolutely recoverable, but it needs to be put in the bin now. Anyway, with that I think that's everything I had for you for today. So, videos out as and when I can make them. Tosh news tomorrow, because I completely forgot to put up a Tosh Talks poll this week, so we'll just do the news. Hollow Knight on Thursday, Laughing at the Guardian Saturday. Right, if you enjoy my work, do subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like. You can also become a channel member, or leave a super chat or super thanks in any video or stream that I do. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.